Hey everybody, what's up? What's up? Welcome to Wealth Wednesday. This is actually the first time that we've started both at the same time. So StreamYard, aka YouTube, what's up? Instagram, aka Triflin, what's up? Glad to have you guys today. I'm glad you could join me today. We got something nice for y'all today. This is going to be a history lesson of sorts, but I don't really see it as history. I see it more as just, learning something that's important. So, folks, first and foremost, I want to say happy birthday to Elliot Major, my brother. Happy birthday, King. It's good to make another year and happy and proud to be able to see the growth in you, my man. So, just keep up the good work. And, life is about what we make of it. Him and I have a couple of projects coming up. So, we're doing our thing. So, sir, happy birthday. Way to be 21 for how many times you've been 21. All right, cool, cool, cool. All right, folks. So today, let me pull up my notes real quick. I want to make sure we are here today. So last week we actually talked about a book, Souls of Black Folk by author W.B. Du Bois. And that book kind of led me into this book. So today we are going to be discussing a gentleman by the name of Marcus Garvey. Now, for some of you who know who Marcus Garvey is, kudos to you. I always heard his name, never knew what he was about. And, turns out that we need to talk about this. I think in 2022, it's important that we find reasons to go back in history and replay what happened to understand how we can grow from these experiences. Because the difference between then and now is that we have all the information now. Like we know exactly who was right, who was wrong. We know what the governments were trying to do at that time. We know all of the ins and outs of the situation, right? We know it now. Like you can't trick us now. Whatever happened in the past, back then, they didn't have access to everything. They didn't know what was up. They just knew that they were going to do the right thing regardless of how the society, treated them. So we're going to start off with a story about this gentleman here, because I think if you don't know his name and you don't know who he is or what he's about, peace, God, what's going on, brother? How you doing, man? Yes. You commented on my basketball story, and guess what, man? That is me all day. We just had ball this past weekend, and man, I think we won 7 games in a row. We were bad. We did some stuff. So yeah, whenever you come over here, God, we're gonna do all the things. Okay. All right, folks. So I want to start off quickly with a quick kind of connection, and then we'll talk about Marcus. All right. So last week I read a book, The Souls of Black Folk by W. Du Bois, and in that book I understood a little bit more about the struggle back then. We're talking about 1902, 1903, the way that the country was back then in America. They were dealing with a lot of things. You just had the abolition of slavery was done, but it took a while for folks to actually get into living their lives freely. Like we had, the laws that were written against, minority folk back then to get them back into prisons so they can get free labor for the country. There was a lot of trifling things happening in the 1903s, 1904s. So, reading that book and getting an understanding of what the intellectuals at the time thought. I mean, and guess W.E.B. Du Bois was the co-founder of the NAACP. He was the first person that graduated from Harvard, right? And, he was raised in Connecticut. He was born in Connecticut, raised there, went to school for the first time near the, I guess they say the Rust Belt, but I would say it's just, went to school in the South. And that's where he first experienced the level of Jim Crow laws, right? So he didn't really understand the nature of what was happening in the South until he experienced it himself. And that's when he was a student, right? So that's a little different than someone who was raised in the South in that type of environment, or someone who was raised in the Caribbean in a different type of environment, which Marcus Garvey would be a perfect example of. So we're going to connect these two individuals who actually lived around the same time. I think W. Du Bois was a little bit older than Garvey by about 20 years, maybe 21 years. So he was, it's sort of like when, I'm in my 30s talking to someone in their 50s, right? It's like, we're not in the same generation. We're going to think differently. But, there's still a lot of intellectual thoughts that went through both of them that were the same. So we're going to talk about it today. So Marcus Mosiah Garvey was born in August 17th, 1887 in St. Anne's Bay, Jamaica. All right, this is a Jamaican-born man, and he was the 11th child born to his father Marcus Garvey Sr. and mother Sarah Jane Richards. All right, so he's again large family. This is not a small family here. It's a large family. One of the things that stood out to me about the story of Marcus Garvey is the fact that his father was a stonemason and his mother was a domestic worker, and they both were a great influence on his life. Moreover, he would describe his father as severe, firm, determined, bold, and strong, refusing to yield even to superior forces if he believed he was right. His father was known to have a large library where actual Marcus Garvey learned to read and was educated. So one of the things I want to stop on and put a pin here, right? Marcus Garvey was a revolutionary. He was someone who thought about Black separation from back in the 1920s. And when he became who he was back in the 1915, 1917, when he was kind of building up his rhetoric, he had to have been educated somewhere, right? And a lot of the times we have to remember that education starts at home. Last week we said, show me your library and I'll know who you are, right? That's what we said. That's how we want to clarify who's friend and foe in 2022. What are you reading? What was the last book you read? That tells me whether or not you're friend or foe to me. If you're reading books, like let's say you're, a Black person, you're reading books about our history, friend. If you're a Black person, you're reading books on social media or something else that doesn't really apply to our struggle or apply to what's happening in the world, you're just there. I'm not really focused on you. It's important to fill up with something that's going to be of worthwhile, because that way you can actually pay it forward. So in Marcus Garvey's home back in Jamaica, his father had an extensive library of all types of books that he actually was able to educate himself at home to begin with. Now, one of the things about his story that actually resonated with me was that when he was young, he went into Kingston to help found a paper. Like he had to work for a paper, and he participated in a couple of union rallies and things like that. So he kind of got activated from as a child. Like this is 12 years old. And then he went to Central America for a short stint of time, being an actual journalist, reading up stories about how some of the populations there were taken advantage of by their governments, and understanding the nature of what it means to have some sort of civil unrest. He kind of had a much different education than say W.E.B. Du Bois, which we got to say this man's name because I'm sick and tired of like W.E.B. No, his name was William Edward Burgert. Du Bois. That was his name, William Edward Burgert. So let's call him by what his name is, because someone named him all those names, and I'm sick and tired of saying WB. I'm going to call him Webb at this point. But that brother Webb, he was raised in a much different environment. He was raised in Connecticut. He was raised amongst, as a minority, living in a majority population, and really being able to interact, because the North wasn't as racist as the South. And when I say racist, I mean overtly racist. In the South, you were still a slave. In the South, you were killed, murdered, abused. Even after the Emancipation Proclamation, that didn't even matter to some folk, because they didn't even know slavery was over until Juneteenth happened, right? Which was like 2.5 years later. So if you don't understand the history of these things, you're going to get lost. You're not going to realize where things lay, right? So when I look at how Marcus Garvey was raised, and I look at how William Edward Burgert was raised, they were completely different in how they were raised, but they both understood that there was a value in understanding the quality of your personhood. William Edward Burgert Du Bois, he believed that we should have complete rights across the board. Like it shouldn't be you're more superior than me. No, we should have equal rights, period. If you can take your kid to that school, I should be able to take my kid to that school. If you can get this job, I can get this job. It was a very simple situation for W.E.B. Du Bois. He felt like as Black people in the society back in the 1900s, 1902, 1903, we deserve to have equal treatment. Marcus Garvey was completely different on this idea. Him, it wasn't that he wanted us to be treated different and treated as equals. No, he wanted us to be our own society. Like he didn't even want any intermingling. And this is where these two ideals kind of hit the road. And looking back now in history, being able to see how things turned out for both Marcus and William, right? I can look back and honestly see whoever's siding with a government that is practicing racial practices, I'm going to say is on a lesser, not even a lesser, but on a less righteous path to me. Because when you look at righteousness, you're looking at, what's going to be best for the majority of people, right? Looking at what's the best for the greater good. Okay, so there's levels to it. Like you can be right and there's levels of correctness. Like you can say, hey, stealing is not right. It's wrong. But stealing from someone who stole from you, levels. You can say killing and murder is wrong, right? But if someone's trying to kill your family and you murder them, is it still wrong? Levels. So all of these are just kind of examples of where there's levels to rightness. There's levels to it. And when I look at the two of them, they were both on the right track, which means they were both moving in the right direction, saying, hey, we need to be treated as equals. We need to have our own establishments that can actually help to perpetuate our own self-esteem and to get us to be in our own communities, but also that we are collectively with everyone else treated as equals. Like we shouldn't have to separate ourselves to be treated as equals. We're all made in God's image. There should not be anything different, right? That was William Edward Burgart's idea. Marcus Garvey was different. He said, no, I don't want anything to do with y'all. We're going to create our own free, sustaining society. And once we establish that, then we can come to the table and you'll respect us as such. His approach was very different because it didn't take the idea of we should be equals because it's the right thing to do. Marcus Garvey's approach was we need to establish our own free, independent state in Africa and basically say that as Africans, wherever we are located in the world, we are all underneath an umbrella of our melanated skin. Like if you're of melanated descent, you are now under this jurisdiction. Therefore, if anyone messes with you, they mess with all of us. Think of it this way, right? And I'll give you an example of why I kind of agree more with Marcus's idea than William. So think of lynching. And I don't want to talk about lynching on this program, but we have to just quickly get through it, right? Lynching occurred in this country. It's not the first time it occurred in the world, but it was really, really a thing here. It became part of their society. They would create things called picnics, which if you don't know the definition of that, go look that up. That was an actual thing where they would literally, it's a word that's combined of two meanings, which is pick a person to go lynch. That's kind of where it started. You would bring your family, you'd bring your kids, you'd bring your lunch, and the festival of the day to find some black or brown man or woman, string them up. That was the event, right? That's where picnics came from. So that was manifested in this country. They started doing that as if it was a part of society here. Now, if you had an entire country behind you, and if they were to see a picture of one of their citizens strung up on a tree, that would turn into an act of war. And they would definitely react and come after you or your forces, wherever they may be. That's the difference between a Marcus Garvey society and a Williams society. In Williams society, it would be, hey, don't string me up because I'm equal to you. We're both equals. We shouldn't have this issue. Treat me the way that you'd want to be treated. Very, righteous way of looking at it, right? Marcus's idea was, okay, if you decide to string up a person of Japanese descent on a tree, and I'm just using that as an example, y'all, that didn't happen, but example, the entire country of Japan would be over on our shores talking about, yo, that's an act of war. We're coming. If you strung up any other person that was from, Switzerland, or person from, Brazil, or a person from Trinidad and Tobago, or a person from, where else? Give me another one. Give me another country. England. If you strung up a national of another country and made that into an event in your country, please believe that as long as that country is civilized and organized, you've just created an act of war. Period. And now you are now subject to all the articles of war that are aligned with that. That's the difference between these two gentlemen, right? One wanted to protect us by creating a synergy of every Black and brown person in the world to say, hey, no matter where you are, no matter where you're from, if you're native of America, native of the Caribbean, native of Africa, but you're in this world, we are going to protect you. And we are going to build with you no matter where you are. If you want to start a business somewhere else, we're going to start up our own transportation business. We're going to start up our own salons, our own restaurants, our own trucking companies, whatever it is, we'll start it and we will create our own networks within ourselves so that we can then establish our own society. Once we've done that, we can then bring that established society to the table to now be treated and respected. So it's not like we're asking you for respect. No, we're going to demand it because now we're bringing an entire unit of respect to you. We're not bringing some random rickshaw situation. And that level of intensity would be different. If that actually worked and happened, we would be looking at a whole different world right now than we're looking at today, just based on the way that both of these gentlemen looked. So let me talk again. So let's go back into this now, right? So Marcus, he is known for organizing the first important American Black nationalist movement in New York City between 1919 and 1926. He had up to 2 million followers in 1920, had a march in Harlem with 50,000 people that attended, 25,000 at Madison Square Garden. Like, we're talking like the UNIA had launched a Black Star Line, which was a shipping company that would establish trade and commerce between Africans in America, the Caribbean, South and Central America, Canada, and Africa, at the same time having factories as well in all of those countries to establish what was happening, right? He did all of this. Now, in 1920 is when Marcus reached his height of like notoriety. He had a really big convention. I was talking about this earlier, where he had 20 delegates present from 25 countries. He had a parade of 50,000. We talked about that. And that's when he started to lose some of the Black intellectuals at the time during that time. And one of the reasons why that started to happen was not only because of his rhetoric, but also because of the nature of what it was doing to the population. You have to remember that anytime a minority gets any sort of advantage when it comes to emotional, economic, spiritual, their powers that are over that minority are going to rile up. And one of the ways that that's worked in our history, we've seen it, is with programs like Watergate, COINTELPRO, all of these government-funded agencies that are literally used to infiltrate these types of organizations and dismantle them from inside out using their own people, right? And one of those things, again, that happened in this situation with Marcus Garvey as well. And it wasn't all his fault. I mean, he had a lot to do with it, but at the same time, that's the nature of the way things were back then. I'm reading a book. I'm actually going to talk about this book next week. So I'm just give you a quick thing. So this woman was accused of killing a state trooper. You probably know who this is. I'm not going to say her name because I'm going to talk about her all next week. But the way that they treated her in her autobiography, it just shows me the type of vitriol and disgusting behaviors that maintained ever since Emancipation Proclamation in 1862, 65, up until today. You know, there is a level of disgusting behavior that has existed in our country for a very long time. And unfortunately, there's no real way to avoid it because you can't ignore the facts. Like, I can look back 200 years and show you the disgusting behavior of the state troopers back in New Jersey, or of any police department post-slavery that was literally used to help reincarcerate Black and brown folks that are indigenous. Like, that what was happening. So to me, we can look at the history. We can see who was doing that. We can see what their intentions were. And we can also see how the government played a role in all of these things manifesting. So when a guy like Marcus Garvey comes out here and he's got 2 million followers, he's got 50,000 Black and brown folks marching down the streets of Harlem, he's got 25 delegates from across the country, from across the world, from different countries, literally taking up this idea of, hey, let's try to nationalize Africa so that Black people, wherever they are protected by us as a national group. Like, we're no longer just Black people with no association. No, we are Black people that are associated with our continent and all the resources therein, which, if you don't know, Africa's resources have been the sole reason why it's continuing to be colonized, plundered, kept in civil unrest. Why is Africa always in that nature? Why are different countries around the world buying land in Africa right now? Why? Because we've always been a place of resources. Africa has been mined for the last, 300, 400, 2,000 years, right? And we've only tapped 10% of its actual total value. like in actual like minerals, deposits, you name it. It's been on tap still to this day, but folks want to protect that because they know that when whoever controls Africa controls the world essentially, right? So Marcus was trying to set up Africa to control Africa, to set up any person of melanated descent to control Africa. Let them see it as not just a place that only savages live or that's too hot or that's whatever. No, to see it as an actual place where you can actually call, hey, this is home. And even though I don't live there, I have a place there no matter what. I have a tie to that country. I have rights. And anything that happens to me, my country will back me. That to me seems like a more higher road to me than wanting to be equals with folks. Because let's be fair, we are only equal if we have an established civilization. Period. Look at the use of sarin gas in Syria and in Ukraine, right? When that noxious gas was used in Syria, they were like, whatever. When it was used in Ukraine, it's like, oh my gosh, they're using it in Europe, in a European developed country. It's the same gas, bruh. It's the same lives being lost to chemical weapons. Is that equals? What's the difference between it being used in Syria and used in Ukraine? Besides complexion and civilization, apparently, right? Doesn't make sense. And I think that's kind of one of the arguments that Marcus was trying to fit in, which was if we have a organized society outside of just America, let's say just worldwide, we have an organized society, you can no longer take us for fools. You can no longer isolate us and treat us differently than every other denomination in the world. Like I said, no other denomination do I know of that was willfully lynched by the majority of any country, period, as an act of like righteousness and domination. I've never seen that, right? Never seen that. So if you want to fact check me, please do. But just know that's how we were treated. And there's no reason for that to happen if we had an established civilization that said, hey, you touch one of us, we're going to war with you. And as a matter of fact, we'll just deny you from our resources. You want to make a cell phone? Too bad. Can't get the resources and minerals from us. You want to, you want to fly to our countries? No, we'll deny your visas. If you continue to lynch our people or folks that look like us, well, don't ever come over here. Because if you do, you're going to be turned back around in a plane at best. And at worst, you might be put in prison for acts of war. Like, you know what I mean? Like, think about if African countries actually behave that way. But they can't. You know why? Because they're taught not to disrespect the order of things. So, Marcus Garvey. This is what this man was about. All right, so let's talk about it. Now, there's one connection that I want to make here. So in 1919, that's when the UNIA launched the Black Star, reached its height in 1920. And this is when his doctrine of racial purity and separatism was dissuaded from the intellectuals, the black intellectuals at the time. So W.E.B. Du Bois actually said, and I'll quote him, he said, so he called Marcus Garvey the most dangerous enemy of the Negro race in America. That's what William Edward Burgard Du Bois called Marcus Garvey. And this was after his speech in New York. And the reason why he said that was because Marcus would say things like he approved of the white racist Ku Klux Klan because of their desire to seek racial separation from everyone, like whites separate from everyone else. He actually approved that because the ends met his means, which were, as long as you don't murder us, but you don't want to integrate with us, I'm okay with that because I don't want to integrate with you until I'm established as a civilization. So he looked past the intentions of an organization like that, which again, I'm not going to mention the name again. I said it once. They're lucky I even gave them that. The folks with white sheets on their face. Those people, their intentions were never to not only just separate or associate with us, but to literally show that they were a more dominant race in society than everyone else, including us. That was their intention. It wasn't just about how it translated out. No, it was like, hey, at a core level, you are less than me. That was their mission when it comes to black and brown skin. Cool. Marcus Garvey said, hey, that's fine. That means you're not going to want to be a part of my community. Cool. Stay over there. Now, if you bring any of that nonsense to us, that's an act of war and we will retaliate. Otherwise, you stay over there. We'll stay over here. He was for segregation. So again, looking back, again, it was a very, very different way of looking back in the 1920s. We're talking like the Titanic just sank 8 years out. You know what I mean? Like this is there was a lot of classism back then, but he was able to see through that and see that there was an important aspect of a civilization. Like you look at any downtown, you're going to see a Chinatown. You're going to see a little Italy. You're going to see an Irish, an Irish corner. You're going to see these populations. You're going to see little India. Like you're going to see that. Even in Jamaica, Queens, there's a place here that's like Little Guyana, where you're going to see a whole bunch of Guyanese stores. Why do these little villages pop up with just a very specific type of cuisine, type of food, grocer, whatever, even little halal spots? I see them like when I go into certain parts of Flushing, not Flushing, certain parts of Queens in Jamaica, there are like only halal, like a halal street. Like you'll see the halal supermarket, the halal butcher, the eyebrow person, like you're seeing communities and you're seeing them cluster together in order to create some level of comfort. And they live in those communities and they support each other. Why was that such a toxic idea for folks when it comes to us? Look at Black Wall Street. They literally bombed it to smithereens. Look at, the place in New York City, Manhattan, Central Park. They literally committed eminent domain and said, everyone that's living here, all of these Black farmers and Black families, 1,200 people, get out. We don't care where you go, but you can't come here because we're claiming this as a national park. Seneca Village is what it was called. Like every time we try to do something like this, we're asked to integrate. But you ask me when Chinatown has ever been integrated. And you know why it hasn't been integrated? Because the folks that actually have businesses in Chinatown and that actually run Chinatown, they wouldn't let it happen. And one of the ways that they wouldn't let it happen is they actually have their own forms of control when it comes to violent acts, when it comes to crime. If you're familiar with New York City and you go to Chinatown, if you don't know who you're supposed to be around, they have their own gangs and forces in Chinatown that will check you if you try to do something stupid to a Chinese person in Chinatown. It's very simple. They self-police. In Jewish communities, if you are in New York City again, you go down Eastern Parkway, you're going to see Jewish hospitals, Jewish synagogues, you're going to see Jewish schools, you're going to see a Jewish police force even. And guess what? If you go into one of those synagogues and you punch a Jewish person in the face, and this is just an example, you can punch anybody, but if you go to a synagogue and punch a Jewish person in the face, you won't even be dealt with by the police or the New York City Police Department. They're not the ones that are going to deal with you. The Jewish folks at that synagogue will deal with you first. And then you'll just get, handcuffed when you get outside. Like these communities are very self-interested in how they protect each other because there's a level of understanding of your pride of your culture. Like those are very proud cultures. The Chinese culture is proud. The Jewish culture is proud, right? They do not play when it comes to each other. They don't. You mess with one, you mess with all, there's a problem. Boom. In our communities, it's not always the same. And granted, we have our gangbangers. We have, the guys on the corner that deal, or we have the guys that protect and, that get into fights. We have the same characters, but we're missing an element. The element we're missing is that we don't have a collective understanding that we're all a part of something. If you're in the Bronx, you rep in the Bronx. If you're in Brooklyn, you rep in Brooklyn. But if you're Black, what borough are you from? Like we're separated by the borough as opposed to being separated by the color of our skin, like everybody else, or the culture that we possess that's unique and the same. And I think this is what Marcus was trying to do, was to say, hey, I don't care if you're from the Bronx, if you're from, Turkey, if you're from China, if you're from Japan, or if you're from India, as long as you're melanated and Black looking like me, you're my brother. I don't care where you're from. You're me, I'm you. If something happens to you, it happens to me. I have pride in you. You have pride in me. We're going to protect each other. That was Marcus. William Edward Burghardt was, no, we're all human. We should all have the rights of humans. You see the difference? One is a very idealistic type of approach, and the other is a grassroots, literally, you can't ignore this as a problem if you want to keep people down. And that is why I believe that Marcus Garvey had to get shut down. They had to shut him down because they knew that if he kept on this rhetoric, if he kept on doing what he was doing, He was going to create an entire black race in New York that was going to no longer stand for the level of racial profiling, the racist practices, the high imprisoned rates, all of that stuff in New York. That wasn't going to work if this happened. So when I look back and I just look at these two gentlemen again, William Edward Burghardt, Du Bois, and Marcus Garvey, look at both of their ideals, look at the time that they lived in. They were 20 years apart. William was 20 years older than Marcus. Cool. When the FBI started to put under surveillance Marcus Garvey, when that started happening, you should know that there was a problem. Guess who else was under surveillance? Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, to name a few, Elijah Muhammad, to name a few. All these folks were under surveillance. Why? Because whatever they were doing was about to cause something to shift in a society that doesn't want any shifting. And this is why I want all of you to understand something. It's okay to be a part of a society when it's looking out for your best interest. Totally okay. But you have to then ask yourself a question. If a society whose government is holding its own interests ahead of yours, and those interests mean that anyone that is trying to create a free, independent thinking person in your community, if they see a person that's creating individuals like that as a threat, what does that say about the government? What does that say about the people that are in charge at the time that didn't want to see that happen? What does it say about the grand scheme of the chess move that we're talking about right now? I question any government that doesn't want me to think independently. I question any government that doesn't want me to see my brother and sister as me and therefore protect someone that looks like me the same way every community protects their own. I was watching a movie called Warrior. It's a series. It's about, folks from Asia coming over and having to deal with things in California back then during the racist times. And, when the West was being colonized, what have you. And you had the Irish folks coming in trying to demand labor. Then you had the Asians coming in and taking a lot of their cheap jobs, cheap labor, and there was all this fight and war, right? Everybody was there protecting their own. Everybody. And it was their right to protect their own. That's how it's supposed to be. But when that happens for us as melanated folks, it's usually a threat to somebody. Who's it a threat to? Why is it a threat to them? And if you're one of us and you are okay with siding with a threat idea of one of our own, which side of the fence are you on? And this is why I wish that some of these ancestors of ours could literally come back in time and literally ask the question, hey, if I could do this over again, what would I do? Like, imagine if W. Du Bois could have a conversation with Marcus Garvey now as ancestors, right? Like, how would that conversation look? Would it be like, hey, Marcus, did you really have to, wear that flamboyant and get up during that parade and act like you're the president of Africa? Like, did you have to do that? I mean, we could have accomplished the same mission if you were just less flamboyant. And he's like, listen, I was swagging out. What you mean? I'm from Jamaica. Have you not seen how we behave? We're confident people. I'm dressed fly. Like, I could see that conversation being very colorful today. But back then they were like at wars with each other. And I'm like, yo, at the end of the day, you both wanted the same thing. And there were two strategies that both would have worked if given perfect variables. But variables are never perfect. And you have to work with what you have. I want to talk about how Marcus got set up and how his entire thing ended, because I want you guys to hear the whole story, right? So Marcus was born in Jamaica, transferred to Central America, did some reporting on like a civil unrest, did all that when he was a teenager, came to the States, set up his nonprofit in Harlem. It wasn't a nonprofit, but I guess his UNIA. He set that up in Harlem, has a Harlem chapter. He set it up in Jamaica to start, but then had a Harlem chapter. That chapter started blowing up. They started doing a lot of things, expanding. They created a newspaper. They started doing all kinds of stuff, getting shipping, doing all of that, right? How did they get him? How did they stop him? Besides, J. Edgar Hoover putting him under surveillance, besides all that. How they got him was him and some of his associates from his company were indicted for mail fraud in 1922 in connection with the sale of stock for the Black Star Line. So he was indicted for mail fraud, right? He served 2 years of a 5-year prison term, but in 1927, his sentence was commuted by the U.S. President Calvin Coolidge and he was deported as an undesirable alien. So think what they did. Got him for tax evasion or mail fraud, whatever have you, right? Put him in prison for 2 years, and then sent him back to Jamaica so he could no longer deal. Now remember that saying, chop the head off the snake and the body follows? You ever heard that saying? He was the head of the snake, right? The head of this 2 million person movement trying to create black nationalism and black Pan-Africanism. He was doing all this, and he was the leading person doing this at the time. So when they were able to stop him, they were able to shut down the entire thing. Now, did that make William's mission easier? Did that make any black person's mission easier? The fact that now they no longer have access to the resources, to the industrial aspect, to the intelligence, to the connections, to the businesses that were set up, all of the things that this man did, including the UNIA, all of that got nixed in one foul swoop. Were we better off because of it? Were we worse off because of it? Right? When I think about this from looking back, it's like you just took out somebody who was establishing Negro Factories Corporation, the Black Star Line, which was, again, commuting, chain of restaurants, grocery stores, laundries, a hotel, a printing press. One man did all of this and was able to rally 25 delegates from different countries towards his cause. And you were able to get him on mail fraud, and then you extricated him you commuted his sentence. You said, hey, you don't have to serve the rest of your sentence. Just get out of our country. We don't even want you here because you're an undesirable. Undesirable to who? I'm sure the 2 million people that were following this man didn't think that he was undesirable at that point. They were either employed by him, taught by him, learned how to actually create their own establishments by him and with him. So who was the undesirable to? Who benefited from Marcus Garvey being ejected back to Jamaica? Who benefited from that? It wasn't us, but who? And this is why it's important to know your history, because anytime a leader from our community rises to prominence, however charismatic they want to be, they're usually destroyed by some type of governmental agency, one, and two, all of the usefulness that they had and all the things that they did is maligned in a way where you don't even think about them anymore. And then boom, they're gone. Get them out the country, the whole rebellion will fall, and that's it. That's the end of it. But that's not the end. That's not how this goes. We have history. We have references. We have books. We have his speeches. And in Marcus Garvey's speech, one thing that sets, and this book that I'm actually going to post this book right now. This is the book that we are reading today. Okay. The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. And the reason why, if you don't own this book, I need you to go get it, own it, understand what he was teaching. The reason why I want you to understand what he was teaching is because you don't know how bad it was unless you can live through someone else's experience of that in the past. And books are a good way to understand the logic, the reason, the time, the place, the way things were back then. It's a way for you to literally step back in time and understand where these folks were built, how they were the way that they were, and why they had to act the way that they acted. It gives you a different perspective and shows you how to navigate today. And that's how I wanted to bring this subject back home. Like, how do we take the teachings of Marcus Garvey, the teachings of William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, and all the other intellectuals back then in the 1900s, 1920s, how do we take their teachings and apply it to today? You know, we don't have the same issues that they had, but we have similar ones. They're just a lot more underground. So one of the things that I need to do, as a matter of fact, give me 1 second. I got to plug my stuff in or else this thing's going to die on you guys. How far are we? We got 17 minutes. We will not make that. Let's see. Give me 1 second, y'all. I'm going to keep that post up 1 second. I'm going to give you guys, I got to get my charger. I'll be right back. and it's never far, right? My stuff's always close, but I thought I could get through this show, but it's like, no, you're not going to get through this show without plugging up. What do you think this is? How dare you think that like the phone's fine? It's just the laptop won't survive. And YouTube, you and I are best friends. I can't see you dying on me middle of a show talking about, hey, no, you got my audio, you got my video, you got the roadcaster, you got everything. You can't go. You gotta hang out with me. All right. Almost there, folks. 1 second. All right, we're good. We're back. So yeah, it's important that we understand this. And for folks who are saved by the charger. For folks who've heard of these folks and again, they know their teachings, everything else, and yeah, you don't have to get the book, but I would say again, you got to teach our kids about this. I'm a big proponent of teaching the next generation about the mistakes of a previous generation. Whatever mistakes we didn't get right, we got to fix that for the next generation going forward. And by showing them who these people were, Black history isn't just something that happens in February. Like it's literally just history, period. And I think it's important that we focus that, like that should be the focus of every person's education. Your focus should definitely be, how do you understand the philosophies of our ancestors, the folks who came before us, who dealt with, post-slavery, Jim Crow, all that stuff? What issues did they have back then? And how can we learn from those issues in a way where not only we're applying the lessons that they taught us, but we're also taking the mission that they had forward if it was a valiant one? Like I understand the idea of having, a nation that supports you. Imagine if every Black and brown person in this country knew that no matter what, if someone tried to, abuse them in any way, shape, or form, that entire country would pay their attorney fees or get them housing or be able to come and support them if they needed it. Like, that's how other communities have it. Why doesn't our community have it like that? Why? Because we were not allowed to have it that way for a very long time. And that time is up. Time is up, y'all. No longer will those things work. So it's important that we look at all the successes that we've had in the past from our ancestors, look at the things they tried to accomplish, figure out how we can get those things done in 2022, 2023. Like, how can we create a strong community that understands and respects itself? How can we create a camaraderie that when we see anyone that has our same experience going through it, that we have an association that supports all of us and allows us all to grow and learn? That was what Marcus Garvey was trying to talk about. That's what William Edward Burgard Du Bois talked about. These folks were our ancestors. They were born in 1887 and I think 1868. Like, these folks were born just after the abolishment of slavery. That happened in 1863, right? To 1865 during the Civil War. Like, that's when, I think it was 1862 September, was drafted by Lincoln, and 63, boom, it was issued. Law, no longer slavery. Cool. Did you guys find out about it in Texas? No. It took federal soldiers going to Texas, Galveston, and saying, hey, by the way, June 1865, you guys are free. You're not slaves anymore. 2.5 years later. These guys were born 5 years after, 23 years after those experiences happened in America. And they literally were raised in a post-slavery world that still looked crazy. And they wrote books about it. They wrote philosophies about it. They tried to create and uplift each other, even though they were pitted against each other during intellectual arguments. I understand where they were coming from, because I'm telling you, like, W.E.B. Du Bois was he was the first Black person to graduate from Harvard. You know what kind of person that guy must have been? Like, think about the level of intellectual that he would have been. But also remember, the institution back then was racist still. So he had to go through a different type of training. And we needed it. Imagine if those two guys joined forces. A guy that was Harvard graduate, a gentleman that was born in Jamaica, that was raised on the streets, that understood the newspaper, understood what it was to be a revolutionary. And those two combined forces, one at 50, one at 40, one at 20, because that's the difference in their ages. Do you know what type of amazing collaboration those two could have had if they weren't pitted against each other because of minor differences? And that's what I see is it's a continuous type of issue, a karma of sorts. Look at Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X. Again, two men pitted against each other, even though they were both better together than apart. Like every time I see us as a community, I'm going to give you guys this. We are always better together than apart. Just remember that. Always better together than apart. So anytime someone wants to leave your presence or leave your group or leave your connection, they're going to be in a less powerful position because now they're isolating from someone that could potentially help them, right? And that's kind of how most of our leaders were treated back then. I remember in Malcolm's biography, he was isolated from everyone, including Elijah Muhammad, who literally got him out of prison and from being a junkie to being a minister, one of his most powerful ministers in the Nation of Islam. Like that was the person that literally got him out of prison, taught him how to read and write, taught him how to speak, taught him how to respect himself, taught him who the devil was, taught him who he was, right? And then society and the government together did this to them, ripped them apart. And it used their own ego. It used their own reliance on self. And it used the people inside of their worlds to do it, right? That is a common thread, y'all. You don't see that? When you can get me to hate my brother and my sister, who has been looking out for me my entire life, or who has been the reason why I was able to elevate to where I'm at, you've successfully pulled me away from the source of our strength, which is the community, the tribe. And remember, even as the slave trade was going on, they had to literally take the slaves from where they came from, put them somewhere else for a couple years just to reorganize them so they didn't know where they were, and then take them across the ocean. Because when they took them straight from Africa, those boats were getting burnt down. There was a lot of they weren't getting the level of cooperation that they were getting after they started leaving their slaves somewhere for a couple years to change their mindset, change their name, change how they think of culture, and then send them over. Like there was a lot of mental effery that took place because, again, when people know who they are, it's hard for you to stop them. And that is the level of understanding that I want you to take away from this show, which is we have to understand the root of everything and the root of the individuals in our past who were giants and did amazing things for our culture, especially for this time frame. We're talking about a time frame where you weren't even seen as human, a time frame where you or your siblings could be lynched at any point in time, a time frame where you could be robbed, stolen, given to a farm in the South, and literally indentured servant for the rest of your life and not even know what freedom looked like. Like this was a time where folks were fighting for their rights to live. And these men were coming out of that type of time frame with the idea of being their own independent civilizations, regardless of anything around them. Like if we can come together and we can support each other and support our continent where we're from, boom. Now let me give you something else. I think this is the argument that I hear some Americans make when it comes to, African nationalism, right? Some Americans are indigenous of America. Some Americans are actually from here. Not from Africa, they're from here, or they're from, an indigenous part of this country. There's a word that I want you to know, and this word is orthoctodus. Let me pull it up so I can say it correctly to you guys. There's a word I want you guys to start using because it's words like this, and my father taught me this word this past weekend, and I was like, wow, that word resonates with me. I'm going to write it down. Here it is. This road, autochthonous, okay? It means of an inhabitant of a place, indigenous rather than descendant from migrants or colonists. We have to understand that some of us are not migrants to America. There are folks who are literally autochthonous, literally from here, indigenous from here, not descendant from someone that moved here, like Americans from Europe that moved to America and want to claim America's theirs, or folks that came from wherever and moved to a location and claimed it as theirs. Like, look at Israel. Folks that literally migrated to Israel that are claiming they're Israelite. I'm like, are you though? You're not indigenous of Israel. You are a migrant or a colonist that came to Israel, but you're not indigenous of Israel. Do you know what the people look like in Israel back in the day before you got here with your immigration self? Like, this word, I want you guys to take this word, autochthonous, add it to your vocabulary. Understand that as a melanated person, you are autochthonous to some of the areas that you are in. You're not migrated there. You are indigenous of those areas. Okay. Autochthonous. New word of the day, y'all. Of an inhabitant of a place, indigenous rather than descendant from migrants or colonists. Okay. Understand that word. All right. Let me pull a sec down. So there are some Americans who will say to me that we're not Africans. We're from America. We're literally indigenous. I have, ancestry goes back to South Carolina. Like my family was a part of the tribes, the native tribes that were here. Cool. And that's an okay argument. I get it. Now, where is your power when that's your story? Is the tribe that you're a part of in South Carolina, are they established to a place where they're in a foreign government where if someone were to try and harm you, they could step into the process and say, leave our citizen alone, or you're coming to war with us as a tribe in South Carolina, native, whatever have you, right? If you don't have that level of protection from that tribe, I would ask you this question. What's the harm in you joining a movement where you now have the protection of not just that tribe in South Carolina, but every tribe in every part of this country, world, and civilization? Like, where are you worse off, right? And that is the argument that I would say that only Black and brown melanated Black folk in this country have to get past, in my opinion, because again, I'm, born in Trinidad, raised in Toronto, Canada, of Nigerian descent. I've got all three areas, right? I've got the Caribbean slave thing. I've got the North American slave crap. I've got the actual home indigenous, autochthonous idea, right? I've seen all three. I understand all three. Still Black though. Still Black, no matter where I'm at. I still look like this. Facial hair goes like this. Skin still pops like this. I'm still this, right? No matter where I stopped along the way, I'm still this. And if there was power in this that could connect with your power and everyone else's power that looks like us, we're in a better position. And that's what Marcus Garvey was trying to teach us. That it doesn't matter if you were born in Connecticut or if you're born in the South. If you're Black, I should be protecting you. You should be protecting me. If you're born in Japan and you're Black, you're not Japanese. You're Black in Japan. There's a difference. All of these connections are important for you to understand. Like, we have to start becoming one, because that's the only way that we'll be able to be respected in this society, in my opinion. Again, this is just my opinion. You can read this book by Marcus Garvey yourself and just read what he was trying to say. And I understand him. I really do. I think that at the time, it was a very necessary message. And this is before the Nation of Islam, by the way. This is before the Black Liberation Movement. This is before all of these things that stemmed in America after Marcus Garvey was already extricated and not even here anymore. All of these movements happened after this, right? The Emancipation Proclamation, that happened before everybody, right? But Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, I Have a Dream, happened after this. All of that happened after this. And we're talking about the time right after slavery. One of the things that was talked about in Marcus Garvey's book, was the fact that right after slavery, pastors were used as pawns to literally continue to oppress Black and brown people at the time after they were freedmen. And how they did that was they would take their version of the Bible, their version of what that means, and they would literally pimp the congregations at the time. Some of them did that. Not all. A majority, though. Some were good. Most were not back in his time. And it's interesting because the church has been a very important, steadfast organization in Black communities since post-slavery up until now. And to think of the transition that happened through along the way, like how did it go from, what it was post-slavery to what it is today? Today, it's a lot better. There's a lot more stability, a lot more understanding, appreciation in Black churches in America and in Canada than ever before. I was raised in a Black church. I can understand it. So we got a lot of our ethics and values from that process. It wasn't always like that, though. He was in a time where those churches were only designed to keep you oppressed back then, because you didn't read and write. You didn't know how to read the Bible. So the pastor could say whatever he wanted and you'd have to believe it. So here's where I would leave you with this, right? After my time travel back with Marcus Garvey, I appreciate that, sir. What I've come to conclude is this. One, we are stronger as a collective. Two, when we have a nation that backs us or a continent that backs us, we now become citizens of that continent. And therefore, if something happens to us, that's considered an act of war like every other person of every other ethnicity has. We don't have that right now. We don't. If you're, again, I use this example of a Japanese person. If a Japanese person was ever lynched, Japan would go to war with whoever did that. Period. And so would every other country that is civilized. Every other country would do the same thing. So this is why when we don't have that level of backing, it's important for us to create something that can support that. And if we can't create that, then we need to maybe take our ideas and move them somewhere else, because we have to be able to protect each other. And sometimes protection isn't just about actively doing something. Sometimes about removing yourself from a situation. Sometimes the best course of action isn't to be the aggressor, but to be the chess player and think 3 moves ahead. I don't have to fight you if I know that you're going to pretty much whistle out on your own if I just move to the left. Maybe that's what the answer is. But at the end of the day, it starts with a level of self-respect. It starts with a level of understanding yourself, your culture, who you are, where you're from, understanding our heritage, understanding the folks that came before us, what they were fighting, how they fought, what was used to put them down, what type of mistakes they made. From all of our brothers and sisters in the past and our ancestors, looking at all of their mistakes and their successes is important. That way you can see what you need to do going forward. I'm a big believer of that. So, folks, that's it. Well, it's Wednesday. We're done. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for joining me on this movement back into history of Marcus Garvey. I'm going to attach the links below so you can actually look up some of the things that I looked up. But I will leave you with this. At the end of the day, we have to be very aware of what our government does, how they view the liberation of our people, and how they view the liberation of your mind. Because when you can start thinking freely as a man, you realize that there's nothing that can control you. When you remember and realize that you are the creator of your own use, the master of your own universe, you're the master of your own situation. No one can control you. And I think that everyone, if you just got that away from this, like whatever you want to be your truth will be your truth. Whatever you want to be your actual life cycle will be your life cycle. You get to determine all of that. No one determines that for you. If we can all get to that space where we're all living in a space of we're creating our own universe, we're creating our own experience here. We own the responsibility of that. And we own the responsibility that you are not just you. You're not an army of one. You are a collective. You are designed to be a community. You're designed to love on each other. When you know that, you understand that, it makes you into a dangerous person, apparently. So let's be dangerous together. Let's create the world that we want to see, and let's understand the mistakes that our ancestors made so that we don't make the same mistakes going forward. Remember, the time is up. It's our time now to understand and to rule and to know who we are. And the only way we can do that is by understanding our past, understanding how we got here, understanding that simple differences don't mean that we have to throw out the whole baby with the bathwater. No. A lot of our leaders had this issue. They all had great ideas, but some had different ideas than the other based on age, based on time frame, based on the way they were raised, what education they had. They just thought differently, but their mission was ultimately the same, but they couldn't see that because they were petty at times and they didn't allow for the greater good to win. And I think that now, being able to look at their examples, we can now see that the greater good is always about liberation of our minds, liberation of our children's minds, being able to live in communities that are safe from having to deal with racism or any type of ill treatment of ourselves, our family, or our loved ones, being able to be free in all meanings of the word, economically, financially, mentally, societally. Like, we need to have a level of freedom so that we can think and be ourselves, to be able to be outside and enjoy the earth, enjoy the sun, enjoy nature, enjoy the things that we were here to do. Like, this is what we're here for. Anything that leads us in that direction, we should be supporting. So folks, get outside, get some sun, love on each other, and I'll see you next week when we're going to be talking about a wonderful woman who lives in Cuba right now. We'll talk about her next week, folks. All right, peace out. Share this and like this. This is the way. This is what we do. And we'll see you guys next week. Peace.